Hey there, this is the Resistor Vic podcast. I'm here to get folks thinking about politics as something that's really about regular people like you and me, and to realize that together we can make a difference. I'm Vic Myers. Welcome to the Resistance. If you missed me last week, well, Turkey Day just totally foobarred my schedule, so I wasn't able to make it work. And I promised you once, after doing a really, what I felt was a terrible episode, because I forced it, I promised you that I would never do another episode that I did not put the proper time and thought into. Which is why I really hope you like this one, because this one has been on my mind. It's been messing with my mind for quite some time now. And I finally got around to putting it down on paper and, I think, figuring out what I wanted to say. And that is episode 27 of the Resistor Vic podcast. Is the Constitution dead? When I was a kid, me, all the people in my generation, we were taught that the United States Constitution is a living document. You know, I always thought that was very powerful. Because what does that mean for the Constitution to be a living document? It means that the Constitution isn't frozen in the 1700s. It means that it can change. It can grow. It means that when injustice is exposed, the system itself contains a way to correct itself. It acknowledges that our system of government, it isn't perfect. In a way, it's the definition of progress. That's how I see it. But more importantly, the idea of the Constitution being a living document carries a promise. The promise that when power overreaches, when leaders fail, when injustice becomes undeniable, the system will respond. That promise matters. It matters because it gives ordinary people a reason to believe in participation. It suggests that the work of democracy is ongoing and that citizenship is not passive. We were taught that the Constitution lives because we use it. When I look around today, I got to admit that what I see does not match what I was taught. For instance, we were told that we have 3 co-equal branches of government. But in practice, those branches are not behaving as equals. In 2025, Congress defers. In 2025, the courts excuse. In 2025, the executive accumulates power. And oversight is treated like disloyalty. Don't you dare speak against this president. Accountability, that's framed as chaos. How dare you sue me in court? How dare the courts even try and hold me accountable? They're all rebels, right? They're all socialists or communists or anything but loyal Americans because they asked for accountability. So the question that keeps pushing itself to the front of my mind is this, the thing that's been just eating away at me for quite some time now. If the Constitution is alive, then why isn't it reacting? A living thing responds to injury. A living thing fights infection. A living thing adapts to danger. What I see is paralysis. What I see is a lack of alarm being raised by those who derive their power from the Constitution, while those who are supposed to be protected by the Constitution are screaming from the rooftops into a void. We're pointing at the Constitution, and they, members of Congress, the courts, they're refusing to use it. Now, the Constitution's not dead, but it is on life support. It's not healthy. It's not functioning on its own. It's still breathing, but only because something external is keeping it alive. And I reckon for some, the life support is an uncomfortable metaphor, but it matters. A patient on life support still has a heartbeat. There's still something worth saving. That patient cannot survive passively. Survival depends on caretakers. Survival depends on intervention. Survival depends on people deciding not to pull the plug. And that's where responsibility enters the picture. While I was trying to put all this together, and where a lot of it actually led from, frankly, I found myself wrestling with the work of a historian that I respect deeply, even when I frequently disagree with where his conclusions lead. His name is Tad Sturmer. If you want to look him up, that's Tad, T-A-D, Sturmer, S-T-O-E-R-M-E-R. He is a historian of the American resistance, and he knows his history cold, especially the parts that most of us were never taught in school. Very highly educated. Used to be a staffer in Congress years ago. I have nothing but respect for him. On history, he's right. The founders were not saints. They were politicians. Many were enslavers, sure. Many designed a system that protected property and power first. The phrase, "we the people," originally, it referred to a very small and exclusive group. No, they weren't saints. They weren't devils either. Where I struggle emotionally and intellectually is not with his critique, it's with what happens after it. Because critique is not the same thing as abandonment. No, I don't worship the founders. I don't excuse their failures. But I also refuse to conclude that acknowledging injustice requires us to discard the most powerful democratic tool ordinary people have ever had. The Constitution. Nowhere in history have people had such a powerful document at their disposal. But still, they wrote it, and they wrote it for their reasons. But tools outgrow their makers. It happens all the time in history. The printing press, it wasn't invented to empower democracy, but it most certainly does. Labor laws, they weren't actually written by the workers, but workers used them. And yes, for those who are staunch advocates of unions, myself included, I get that they wouldn't have come about without the workers forcing them. But a lot of the times, what the unions used to force these labor laws was the Constitution. The Constitution did not generously grant rights to the marginalized. Those rights were forced out of it through struggle, like labor laws. Whether by intent or whether by accident, the founders created a document that contained contradictions, and people who were excluded seized upon those contradictions and used them. And that is how progress actually happened. The clearest example is the 14th Amendment. Formerly enslaved people were turned into citizens under the law. Equal protection was written into the Constitution not because the system wanted it, but because the moral failure of the original document could no longer be defended. That amendment became the foundation for civil rights, voting rights, desegregation, due process, and marriage equality. That is the Constitution learning. That is the Constitution adapting. That is the Constitution living. Another example is the 25th Amendment. After President Kennedy's assassination, the country realized something very terrifying. The Constitution, or in the Constitution rather, there was no clear constitutional mechanism to deal with a presidential incapacity. Nothing. That's why Woodrow Wilson's wife ran the presidency. She was effectively, if not legally or literally, she was effectively the president while he recovered from a stroke. Anyway, I digress. The 25th Amendment. After Kennedy was assassinated and the people realized that there was no mechanism for an incapacitated president, the system responded. The Constitution was amended again to ensure continuity and stability and accountability. That is not a dead document. That is a system recognizing danger and building a safeguard. The Constitution has also proven that it does not need to be amended in order to act. It just simply needs to be enforced. Brown v. Board of Education did not change the Constitution. It enforced it. States had ignored the 14th Amendment for decades. But through Brown v. Board of Education, the Supreme Court finally made equality the law rather than an aspiration. During the Watergate era, Congress investigated the president. The courts compelled evidence, and Richard Nixon resigned when Congress, the courts, even his own party, enforced constitutional limits. They told him, we are going to impeach you and find you guilty and remove you from office if you stay. And that is why he resigned, because he didn't want to be the first president to be forced out of office. Also, he would have been up on charges next, probably. He would have lost his retirement. It would have been devastating for him. The system worked because the institutions chose to use it. During the Vietnam War, the Pentagon Papers revealed that multiple administrations, from Truman through Johnson, multiple administrations had knowingly lied to the public about the Vietnam War. And when the executive branch tried to block newspapers from publishing the truth, the Supreme Court enforced the First Amendment. The government was told that it does not get to censor embarrassment in the name of national security. In each of these moments, the Constitution itself did not save democracy simply by existing. It saved democracy because people invoked it and institutions enforced it. Which brings us back to now. Any intellectually honest person can look at our president and see that he does not possess the intellectual capacity to do the job. My dad passed away when he was 80 of a stroke. But in the two to 4 years before that happened, there was a change in him. I mean, he lost his filter. He would get angry and lash out at people. People that were friends, people that were friendly to him. Just the same way that Donald Trump behaves now. And I remember during the campaign, I was thinking, man, he reminds me of Dad. And now he's so much worse, far worse than Dad was. Anybody who's had an elderly parent go through, I think Dad never got diagnosed, but I think he had some dementia. And I've never personally experienced somebody with Alzheimer's, but I've read enough about it. I've heard enough testimonials about it. Anybody who's gone through that is looking at Donald Trump and saying, this guy is incapacitated. The 25th Amendment exists, yet no one will touch it. Every single congressman, every single senator and representative should be saying to themselves, the 25th Amendment needs to be invoked. Now, to be sure, that it's the cabinet, it's the president's cabinet that needs to invoke it. But all those people are working for the people behind the Project 2025. They're not working for Donald Trump. They're holding him up. They're propping him up because that's what their masters want. But any one of them could go on any news program tomorrow and say, it's time to invoke the 25th Amendment. That's all it would take. It's just one honest, country-loving, Constitution-believing member of Donald Trump's cabinet to step up, or his vice president, any one of them to step up and say, it's time. But they won't. They won't touch it. Congress is finally getting worked up about what's going on in Venezuela. They're finally recognizing war crimes are happening. They hold war powers in the Constitution, but they refuse to assert them. Excuse me. They refuse to tell this administration that they cannot do what they're doing. Tariff authority belongs to Congress. They wrote it into law to give up their power, their tariff power, to this president. Courts, the Supreme Court in particular, yeah, it's applying constitutional limits, but it's not doing it equally. When it was Joe Biden, no, you're overreaching. When it's Donald Trump, that's executive authority. And the whole immunity thing, it's crazy what this court's done. But the tools themselves are still there. They're not being used. Congress isn't using them. The Supreme Court's not using them. And this is where the metaphor hardens into something clearer. The Constitution does not die from attack. It dies from disuse, especially by those sworn to defend it. And that forces a harder conversation about we the people. We talk about the Constitution like it enforces itself. It does not. It never has. The Constitution has no immune system. It has no reflexes. It does not respond automatically when power overreaches. Every safeguard written into it assumes something deeply uncomfortable. It assumes that people will act when institutions fail. Right now, the Constitution is on life support, not dead, still breathing, still intact on paper, but unable to survive on its own. If the Constitution is on life support, how did it get there? We were taught to admire the document. We were not taught to use it. Admiration does not stop authoritarianism. Participation does. The question is not whether the Constitution is dead. The question is whether we, the people, are willing to do what it takes to keep it alive. This is where responsibility stops being abstract. If the Constitution only works when people use it, then civic faith without action is nothing more than nostalgia. Symbols do not enforce law. Participation does. That is why I frequently talk about incumbency in this country. Incumbents win re-election at staggering rates, regardless of party. Donor pipelines, name recognition, and institutional inertia protect office holders even when they stop doing the job. Running one challenger against an incumbent often changes nothing. But inevitability is a choice that we keep reinforcing. My belief is that we, the people, need to reclaim the power of disruption. Step one is voting against incumbents in primaries when they have failed to use their constitutional authority. Right now, there's only a handful of members of Congress who are willing to entertain the idea of impeaching Pete Hegseth. Everyone who's not should be primaried. Step two is encouraging as many people as possible to run in those primaries. And by that, I mean that every office up for election in 2026 needs to have at least 20 candidates. Not just the incumbent and a challenger. Not because every challenger will win, but because a flood of challengers destroys the illusion that a seat is owned. One challenger can be ignored. 20 challengers cannot. And this is not about ideological purity. And it's not about chaos. It's about accountability. Well, that said, nuance matters. There are real reform candidates already running. There are people risking everything to challenge entrenched power. This is not about undermining them. It is about targeting complacency. It is about office holders who treat their seat like a lifetime appointment. The greater good argument here is not about perfection. It's about restoring choice in a system that has decided voters don't need a choice. If the Constitution is life support, then participation is the treatment. Voting is not the cure, but it is also not optional. Running for office is not symbolic. It is structural pressure. Public accountability is not division. It's maintenance. We were never meant to simply admire this system. We were meant to operate it. The founders may not deserve reverence, but the tool that they left behind demands responsibility. History shows that the Constitution can work. It can adapt. It can restrain power, but only when people insist that it does. Right now, silence is not neutrality. Disengagement is not wisdom. Disuse is not innocence. The Constitution is still there. The question is whether or not we are. All right, folks, next week I am going to have, and the timing couldn't be better, I'm going to have Blythe Potter, who is running for Secretary of State in the state of Indiana. She's going to come on and tell us all about herself and tell us why she's running. We're also going to talk a little bit about her main opponent in that primary, who is a legacy candidate, which is something I probably am going to have to do a whole new separate episode on. But anyway, she'll be here next week. I can't wait. I think it's going to be a good show. In the meantime, thanks for making me a part of your day. Good day. Well, folks, looks like we're back at the barn and it's time to call it a day. I sure do appreciate you spending your time with me. If you want to help keep this podcast going by supporting me, you can get a paid subscription on Substack, where I'm Resistor Vic. Or if you're the type that'd rather go to PayPal, I'm also resistorvic@gmail.com. Thanks again.